We should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered for this meeting. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of the Patwin people, including the Yocha Dehe Winton Nation today. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be gathered here today on their traditional lands. Okay, it's all yours, Mike.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. So this is certainly a good day to be inside watching a Zoom presentation. Um, so hopefully we'll get a little cooler weather in a few days. But so this is going to be hard on our tomatoes. But Dr. Patricia Lazicki will be able to give us some ideas on maybe what to do about heat stress in tomatoes and any other problems that people may have. So she's a farm advisor for vegetable crops with the University Extension. And with that, I will turn it over to her.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, my name's Patricia Lazicki. I recently started as a vegetable crops advisor here based here in Woodland. And I think many of you knew Gene Meow. He was my predecessor in this position, retired in 2018. And so big shoes to wear, or big footsteps to follow in. My background is I'm a soil scientist. I did my degree here at UC Davis, so studying soil health, soil carbon, nitrogen cycling. And so I start my position and I find myself in a lot of tomato fields being asked, what is wrong with this field? I'm not an entomologist, I'm not a pathologist, I'm not an nematologist. There's huge range of things that can be wrong with a tomato plant. And so what I was thinking is that you are all often faced probably with the same issue. You have people asking you, what's wrong with my plant? And there's a wide range of potential suspects. So what I wanted to share with you today was kind of some approaches that I've developed over the years for narrowing down that pool. There's a lot of work that you can do once you kind of have an idea of what it is, but how do you get a better idea of what it is? So wanted to go through kind of the approach that I've developed. What do I ask? How do I approach a situation? How do I get information? And then go through case studies and hopefully have good time for discussion. Because the field of what can be wrong with tomatoes is far, far too long for a single talk. So happy to go into some specifics if the conversation goes that way. But for the approach, I find I can distill it to 3 areas, and it's not necessarily linear. These are all informing each other. So start by looking for patterns, asking questions, and finding a good information source. So I find it's helpful to, first of all, think of who are all the potential suspects. So thinking about the tomato plant as a living creature in a habitat, what does it need? Needs water, but not too much of it, because it also needs oxygen. It needs nutrients at the right time and the right balance. It needs its appropriate pH. Has its temperature range that it likes. It likes sunlight, but not too much of it. And especially it likes consistency. No abrupt environmental changes, very hot suddenly, very cold suddenly. So these are all environmental things which it needs, so they can potentially go wrong. Other external factors that can hurt it, animals, those could be vertebrates like birds or rats, invertebrates like nematodes or mites or caterpillars, and then the various things we call diseases, so fungi, oomycetes, bacteria, viruses. And when we think of viruses, those are often vectored. So it's also, whenever you suspect a virus, it's useful to also think of its vector together. phytoplasma similar to viruses, and then various chemical toxicities, things like herbicides, salinity, fertilizer burn, other chemicals. So I might be missing some, but these are all I could think of for these are your potential range of things to think about when you're called into a problem. What's wrong with my plant? And you just don't have any other information than that. So if I can kind of distill the questions into four, these would be them. I'm asking what happened, so looking for signs and symptoms. I'm asking where it happened on the tissue scale, on the plant scale, on kind of the garden or landscape scale. I'm asking when did it happen? Did it happen all of the sudden? Did it happen associated with any particular weather event? Or what was the weather like? Was the plant young, mature? And then also, who did it happen to? Was it just one variety? Was it many varieties of tomatoes? Did you see it on different species? Was it everything in a particular bed or just like a random plant here or there? So we'll dig into these a little bit more in the next few slides. So when we're thinking about what happened or thinking about describing symptoms, I think it's helpful to divide it into two categories. We're looking for symptoms. So in pathology, when we say symptoms, we're thinking about the response of the plant or the way that the plant looks. So that would be things like yellow leaves or fruit rot or necrotic spots or things like that. When we're talking about signs, this is something that might be less obvious, and at least I don't think about as much, but looking for physical evidence of who might have done it. So that's things like the actual, looking for actual fungal mycelium growing out of one of those dead spots. Or do you actually see any insects around? Do you see their droppings, their frass? There's some tests that you can do. If you think that it's bacterial, you can cut the stem, put it in some water, see if you see streaming out. So these are physical signs of what might have done it. And I would also include the presence of vectors for a viral disease as well. For example, thrips, if you think it's a virus that might have been vectored by thrips, look like, do you actually see those? So that's what happened. When we think about where, probably the number one most important thing when we think about where, or for me, often the most helpful is where is it on the plant? Because a lot of things are going to be associated preferentially with either older or newer growth. So for example, if you're seeing an issue on a lot of plants, and if it's consistently worse on the lower leaves, or if it's consistently worse on the newer leaves, this kind of puts an alarm bell. Think about nutritional issues. And that's because the plant likes to move things when it can to where they'll be the most efficient. So nitrogen, it's very mobile in the plant, and it's really important in chlorophyll. And so the plant will move it to those younger and more active leaves. And so that means if the soil is deficient, it'll have to rob the older leaves to feed the newer leaves. And so where you'll see deficiencies worse is on the older leaves. Like you can see it throughout the plant if it's really deficient, but it will tend to be worse on the older leaves. And that's true of phosphorus, to some extent of potassium, magnesium, these macronutrients. A lot of the micronutrients and also calcium, they're the opposite. They actually can't move so well in the plant. And so they just have to stay put in the older leaves. So as the soil gets more deficient, that younger tissue comes out with the symptoms. So if you see a lot of plants that are all being treated the same or sharing the same bed or something like that, we are consistently seeing more on the older growth or on the newer growth. Nutritional issues could be something to think about. Tomato viral diseases are also things that often show first on the brand new growth. I think this is likely because a lot of the vectors are going to be more attracted to the juicy new growth. But so when you see things on the newer growth, my mind immediately goes to nutritional issues, though that's a little bit less common here. I haven't seen many micronutrient deficiencies here, just are it's reliant on pH, and our pH is usually okay-ish. But viral diseases, those are a good first suspect if you see it on the newer growth. Sometimes herbicides. And if we're thinking about soil-borne diseases, those often, though not always, you'll tend to see on older growth, not necessarily on the oldest, but you won't necessarily see it on the newest growth first. And then it's also interesting if you see symptoms that affect the whole plant about the same, or like just on one side or something like that. But just, I guess with the example with the nutrients, kind of thinking about, okay, if you're seeing a pattern in the plant, what does that tell us about how it's moving in the plant, how it's affecting it? So for example, if you come out one day and a perfectly healthy tomato plant is just, the whole plant's totally wilted. Like, obviously that's not going to be a nutrient deficiency, because that's something that needs to happen over time. But if it's something like that, you might suspect something that stopped the plant's ability to get water. So say something nibbled off the stem right below the soil line, or some bacterial diseases, they'll totally plug up the vascular tissue and just cause everything to wilt at once. Then the second question around where is kind of on a smaller level. Let's say you have like brown spots on the leaves, or something like that. Where on the leaf is it located? So something that's especially interesting is whether you see it tending to be around the margins. If you see crispy margins, often, though not always, that means some kind of, that it's something abiotic. So often when there's toxicity in the leaf, if it can, the plant will kind of nudge it out towards the leaf margin. So things like salt toxicity, boron toxicity, those will show up on the margins. Some herbicides will do it. One or another reason that you can see things on the margins is bacterial diseases. They really like water. And so if, like this year, we had a lot of cool mornings, we had a lot of dew, we had a lot of situations where there was water staying on the leaf for a long time. Well, water tends to collect more around the margins. And so if you have the kind of weather where you might suspect a bacterial disease and you start to see that marginal necrosis, it can be a sign that it's like bacterial stack or something that you often tend to see more around the margins. So just to say, various diseases have places on the leaf or on the fruit that they more often tend to show. Another thing you could look for is where they are in relation to the veins. So with the veins in the leaf, those act as a barrier to bacteria. And so if you see that the problem tends to just be within veins and doesn't really cross them, that can be another sign that maybe it's something bacterial. And then also thinking about just contact with the soil. If you're seeing, let's say, big brown lesions right around the crown or something like that, pretty often that's fungal. You're not necessarily in your garden digging up plants, but if you see things on the roots, something that's living in the soil, which is often in our environment fungal. So we've talked about looking for wear on the plant, looking for wear on the leaves or on the fruit. Do you see things on the petioles as well? It's good to take note just because there's some diseases that will only affect the leaves but not the fruit, whereas other diseases affect both. So noticing where all, like which all plant parts you're seeing symptoms can also be helpful for narrowing down. And then thinking about on a broader scale, where in the garden are you seeing it? If it's on multiple plants, do you tend to see it associated with any particular environment? For example, everything that's along the fence next to your neighbor who sprays a lot of Roundup, or only in the sun, only in the shade, things like that. Places that are wetter or get poorer drainage, places that are drier. This is, of course, different in commercial fields because they're very big and they're drip irrigated, but you can tell a lot by seeing, is it near the tail end of the field, because that's getting a lot more water, for example. So yeah, but in the garden, there's microenvironments. So seeing, is it associated with any particular place or potential stress? Another really important question is, when did it happen? And again, this has a couple of different levels. And this can be really hard if you're consulting for somebody else, because often, actually with all of these can, where as well, because often somebody will just show you like a picture of a leaf and say, okay, like, and that's just a single shot in time, but tomato issues, they develop in time and over time. So this is something where delving and asking some questions can be helpful. If it happened really suddenly versus gradually, that's good to know, because things like nutritional issues and some diseases, they just naturally tend to progress slowly. So if something kills your plant overnight, it's not going to be nitrogen deficiency. It's probably not going to be a fusarium or something like that, because just we know that these are slower problems. Whereas things like feeding damage or herbicides, some bacterial diseases tend to be more rapid. And then also, if you have a sudden problem, it's a good idea to think, was there any sudden environmental change? For example, I had this terrible problem on my home tomatoes that they all suddenly got this leaf chlorosis, like interveinal chlorosis in the leaves. I was like, what could this be? And then I came into the office and somebody from Master Gardeners came in and they brought a plant that had exactly the same symptoms as mine did. And we realized, the temperature got down to like 36 degrees last night. And we actually saw some reports from around Yolo County. So, and then looking up what does it look like when there's cold damage? Yes, this was very likely cold damage. So sudden problem and associated, was there some kind of a sudden change? Yes, it got very cold that night. Which brings us to the next question, which is very important, which is thinking about what the weather's been doing. Partly that's because abrupt changes can hurt tomato plants. Extreme changes can cause damage. So things like cold, heat, sunlight, things that are used to being in the shade can cause damage. And then something that's not quite so obvious, but that's very important, is that many diseases and some pests have preferred environmental conditions. So you'll really only expect to see infection from some diseases if it's very humid, if there's a lot of water, or some diseases tend to be cool season, some diseases tend to be hot season. So this is why it's really good to get your disease information from local sources. I've found out, because there's all these problems that they have on the East Coast that really you don't see that much in California. So things like like early blight, at least with the processing tomato community, is very, very, very low incidence because we don't get rain, we don't have that much water, we don't have that much humidity, and that's what that particular disease likes. And so looking at the weather can help you, if not exactly cross off some of your list of suspects, at least put them towards the back of your list if the weather conditions haven't been what we know that this disease likes. And then another important question around when is the plant growth stage. And as you're looking at information about particular issues, you'll see that many of them are associated with a particular stage. And that's really true with everything. Like, for example, fusarium diseases, which is something that's really common in processing tomatoes. And I was telling them at the beginning when I was preparing for this talk, I was looking at like local gardening Facebook groups and seeing what were the big problems that come up. And I think fusarium wilt was probably like number 2. So very common in home gardens as well. But these like fusariums, they tend to be kind of stress induced for when they show their symptoms. And so you often won't see them showing much in the way of symptoms until you get some fruit set, and even pretty good fruit set. This isn't always true, but again, if you see symptoms that look like it might be fusarium, but the plant's really young, it'll make you more skeptical, versus if it happens right when you get a lot of fruit set, okay, this is more likely. And a lot of this, it's a good thing to keep in mind as you're reading information. When does the issue tend to be most problematic, as a way to narrow down. And another great question, if it's not just one plant, is who did it happen to? So did it just happen to one of your tomato varieties? Did it happen among several tomato varieties? Did it happen? Are you seeing similar symptoms on multiple species? And this is a really, can be really helpful just because some issues are specialists. For example, the type of powdery mildew that affects tomato is pretty specific to tomato, but some are generalists, like lack of water, like that'll affect everything to different extents, because some are more tolerant than others. But if you have a problem that's affecting multiple species, that can be really helpful in kind of narrowing down what it is. So often when I'm called into a field where I just have no idea where even to start, one of the things I'll do is I'll look for weeds and see, do I see a symptom on any of the weeds as well? Because again, this can help you see, especially if you're seeing anything similar, you can be like, okay, maybe this is something like herbicide damage or a nutrient deficiency that's just more generalist. And then, of course, if you're seeing it on some varieties but not on others, checking the resistance status is also going to be helpful. And then kind of related to the where question, just like if you have, say, a bed that has multiple plants in it, if you see everything in that bed and nothing in anything else, like, okay, could it be something in that soil that they're all sharing? If you're seeing random plants across the garden, thinking about what are mechanisms that could affect this plant in this grow bag, this plant in this bed. And so really getting your mind into how might an issue spread? Is it something that could be universal? Is it something that's just being shared by those ones that are getting sick? And this is kind of complicated because, of course, plants are kind of like us. There's some that are weaker, and tend to be more affected by disease than others that just happen to be stronger. Maybe they got planted better or something like that. So they won't all respond the same to the same pressures, but looking for those commonalities and differences can be helpful. And then kind of similarly, and this is probably a little bit less helpful in the garden than in a commercial field, but if you're seeing something happen to every single plant or every single plant in an area, this tells you a lot, because that's pretty uncommon for something to happen to just everything at once, unless it's like an environmental stress. So if it's something biotic, it tends to be more gradual, this plant, then that one over there. So that's another useful thing to look at. And then finally, and this is again, iterative with asking your questions, is getting your information from reliable sources. And thinking about what sources are reliable, I think professional is probably going to be the most important. Like, I get information from a lot of different types of sources and ideas from a lot of different types of sources, but I don't want to be taking anything as truth, probably, unless it's coming from a university and it has good citations, it has some information about how they got the information. Current is also helpful, though things don't change so quickly, but just there's some information that's a bit older, so newer information is usually going to be, or assume probably a bit more accurate, but older information is also valuable. And then I think local can be really important, I'd say, especially for diseases. So things like, what does nitrogen deficiency look like? Like, that'll be the same if it's a source from Maryland or from California. Like, nitrogen deficiency looks like nitrogen deficiency, but what are common diseases? How do they manifest? Again, there's just diseases that we don't really have that much in California because we don't have the rain and humidity. There's diseases which are very important in California that really aren't in the rest of the US, or things like boron toxicity, which is a very important, very local issue that's not too important anywhere else. So not that you have to have one that's all of them, but the more that you can get local, professional, and current, the better. So put in a plug for UCIPM. When I am searching for information, usually the first thing that I do is, let's say I want to see, what do symptoms of Fusarium wilt look like? I'll type in Fusarium wilt UCIPM. And those magic words help you immediately get to something that you have some idea is at least local and professional and pretty current. Some are more current than others. For those of you who aren't familiar with the page, I think probably a lot of you are, but I just put a QR code with the link here. There's two different pages that UCIPM maintains about tomatoes. One is for gardeners, and the link that I gave you is kind of a clearinghouse, and just with a large list of, these are issues that they've seen, that they have information on, that they think are going to be problems for California gardeners. And in those, it will give you, for example, this is for tomato spotted wilt virus. We'll give you some photos of symptoms, some information about what they look like, how they proceed. So for example, the ones that I underlined, if you're looking at where, upper sides of young leaves. So if I'm trying to figure out if my problem is spotted wilt, I want to look on the young leaves. And then it also mentions that it has fruit symptoms and shows me what fruit symptoms to look for. And then looking down, I see, okay, it's also transmitted by thrips. So that gives me another thing to look for. Like, do I see evidence of thrips? So this is a very useful page. Also want to, in case you're less familiar with, it also maintains a separate page for agriculture. And a lot of this is pretty similar, but it has a couple of other things that I like quite a lot. One of them is this year-round IPM program list. And so it'll list problems that are associated with particular growth stages. Again, this is for processing tomatoes, so not completely applicable to indeterminate, but pretty useful for these are the type of issues that you can expect to see at this time. And then it'll just be the same list of issues. So the management advice is more geared towards agriculture. So probably the home site will be more useful for the management advice. But they sometimes, I'd say it's worthwhile checking both. They sometimes include additional photos, more information. So for example, this is, again, the one for spotted wilt, but from the agriculture site. So you can see they give more information about the type of thrips. They start to on the host range. I ran out of space on my screenshot, but so both the garden and the agriculture sites for UCIPM are going to be useful. This is a handbook that I really like. I have a physical copy, but there's also a free online copy. This is really nice. It has good pictures and good descriptions. I think it's not a substitute for the UCIPM, but it's a good supplemental. And this is through Seminis, and they also have these handbooks for several other diseases as well. So I use them for cucurbits, for eggplants, for peppers. These are really good. And it's not local to California. So with that, you want to kind of parse out what's going to be locally applicable. But they do, for the different diseases, say where you can expect to find them. And again, these are really nice just as a source of more photos, a bit more information. I really like these. And also these are great, like just as a book, because if you, well, in the UCIPM, if you think like, okay, this looks a lot like a virus, and then you can just go through the virus section. Okay, what does it look most like? And then that can give you an idea of what to look in more. Some other good photo resources. Fertilizer companies, surprisingly, can be a pretty good source of deficiency photos. And they often, I find they're pretty accurate, and they often reference where they got them. The California Fertilizer Guidelines, these are just NPK, but they also have some good deficiency descriptions. This website, if you're not familiar, the UCIPM herbicide injury is a really good source if you suspect that potentially it might be herbicide injury. And what it does, they have this tool that, let's see, I clicked on it and I think, okay, there we go. And it will bring you to a place where you can select plant, you can select tomato, and then it will just go through a lot of pictures that were taken by the UCIPM folks of known herbicide damage. And this can give you a good idea of the types of damage that different classes of herbicides do. It was something I was surprised before I started to work with tomato. I didn't realize what a big issue herbicide injury was, but I'd say a good proportion of my commercial calls are herbicide injury, and a surprising number of the posts that I see on like Facebook groups, what's wrong with my tomato, end up being some kind of herbicide injury. So something that's not where my mind immediately goes, but it's useful to have this resource if you're suspected and wanting to see what kind of damage they do. And then the Google image search, which doesn't sound very professional, but it can be very helpful if you're, again, just trying to figure out where you are getting yourself oriented. So I'd say it's a good place to start, to be careful, but be careful. And just some tips for helping it work out well that I found out, make the symptoms as specific as possible. Sometimes it takes a little bit of massaging before they know exactly what you're talking about. And then if you see a photo that looks similar to what you have, actually go and visit the site. Don't just assume that because that picture is under your magnesium deficiency search that it actually is magnesium deficiency. So go to the site. Look at the source, see, is it from a university? Is it a verified diagnosis? And then again, does the location have similar environmental conditions? And then this is an important step because we've all probably done this for ourselves, like Googled our symptoms and found out that we have a rare disease that only 7 people in the world have. This is not likely. So checking UCIPM is a good way around this, just to see, like, is this issue actually like common in California? If it is, it's probably in UCIPM. If it's not in UCIPM, that might still be it, but it's less likely. And then also just to check, to read more about the issue that you think it might be, see, does it actually make sense with your conditions? For example, if it's a bacterial disease that's spread by water and you don't sprinkle or irrigate and there's no rain, that makes sense. There's some ways to do it wrong. This is an actual photo that I found while doing an image search for bacterial canker. So don't search vague symptoms. The more specific you can get, the better. If you don't read the source article, if you just like take it as a given, not looking for details around environment or location, and then not verifying with a professional or local source. And I would say this is also true of like the gardening groups and things like this. Just there's a lot of bad advice out there. So for fun, I just noticed Google has this AI mode. So I was interested to see what it does. So just tried Googling or putting in a kind of a vague symptom, tomato leaves, brown spots. And a couple of things that I noticed, just that they'll give a summary, which isn't bad, but it's kind of vague and it doesn't give geographic information. And it doesn't give the sources that it's getting its information from. In this case, I didn't put in that I was looking for California, but it doesn't, I guess, without that, and just in general, it doesn't seem to be great at giving geographical or environmental context. So, for example, 2 of the sites that it's getting this from are citing things as common, which are very, very uncommon in California. And then also part of what it's drawing from is other AI aggregators. And so if I go and visit the site, like I don't know even from that site where it's getting it from. And yeah, so I would definitely, I think AI searches can be useful for getting ideas of what your possibilities might be, but definitely take it with a grain of salt and go and verify it with something that's more professional. So the next thing I want to do is just a little kind of case study, but want to see how are you guys all doing, and are there any questions? And I see there's one in, is there one in the chat?
There are no questions, but please post questions if you have them.
Okay. Okay. Well, seems like you guys are okay. So wanted to do a quick, this is just a demonstration from, again, I work with commercial growers. So this is an example from a commercial field, but I think it has things that are applicable. This was a situation where I got a farm call to a place where I just had absolutely no idea what I was going into. So a guy gives me a call, what's wrong with the field? So first of all, I'm looking at the symptoms. What I'm seeing is just the whole field just looks kind of generally brown. There's the leaves are curling, browning. The damage is all on the margins. I'm seeing these burned tips are really common. But then it's interesting because the tomato plants aren't stunted. Like they look good, they look healthy. The fruit look good. There's a lot of fruit. So that's the what. So then thinking about where. So this is in Yolo County, and the field is actually in one of the settling basin for Cache Creek. So on the landscape, that's where that is. So I have some questions about the drainage. And I also know that Cache Creek has some issues with boron, so that's something that's in my mind. And then I noticed the whole field has this brownish look. So when we're thinking about where, it's basically every single plant. I noticed that the necrosis tends to be worse on the older leaves. And again, it starts from the margins. So right away, I'm thinking, as I was mentioning before, if it's on every single plant, I'm starting to think about, could it be something abiotic? Because a disease, again, you tend to see more one here, one here, one here, and then maybe slowly getting worse over time till everything is done. But in this case, I was asking the grower about when it happened, and he said it developed gradually. He started noticing it browning maybe a month or so ago, and it became more noticeable when the plant started to grow really quickly. So in my mind, I'm already thinking like maybe it's some kind of toxicity, and that would really go along with it because it's developing gradually. And then as they're taking up more and more water, it's tending to get worse. So based, and then finally I asked who. So this was really interesting because there were a couple of fields nearby that had pretty similar symptoms. So there is this pepper field where the leaves were kind of curling, cupping up. You could see some tip burn, a little bit of damage around the margins, not as much, but similar patterns, and the same on these melons. And then I was looking at the weeds, and some of the weeds had similar, this thing around the margins. So whatever it is I'm looking at, it's something that it affects different plants to different degrees, but it's quite generalist. So based on all of this, I'm thinking probably something in the water or with drainage. So that made me decide I've narrowed down my suspect pool enough that I think it's something chemical or nutritional. So I'm going to take some samples and send them in. So I took leaf samples, water samples, and soil samples. And then it comes time to interpret the information. So this is where the looking up reliable information. I looked at that UCIPM tomato guideline. Actually, I think I probably Googled like boron toxicity, UCIPM or something like this, because I'm thinking it's some kind of a chemical thing. Anyhow, and I found this table for interpreting soil tests. So I see that soluble salts above 4 decisiemens per meter are considered high. My soil test said 5.86. Okay, very interesting. And then I look, boron, which is my chief suspect, it's says greater than 5 ppm is likely to be a problem. Mine's only 3.9. Interesting. But then I look at my tissue samples and things. They're pretty high. So they're both pretty high in boron, but was it too high? So because I've now narrowed down my pool enough that I can kind of do some deep research on a specific thing, I'm able to find some photos of boron toxicity that look really, really similar to what I was seeing. But I also find salt damage symptoms, they can be similar. And as I'm reading more and more on that particular topic, I find like actually like boron's an essential nutrient for tomatoes too, and it really helps in fruit set. And so you can actually have some pretty bad like marginal symptoms before you see any fruit damage. So all of these would go along really well with what I saw, which is there was a lot of browning, but the fruit actually looked really good and the plants looked really good. So was it boron? Was it salinity? As is often the case in this type of thing, you can't really tell because life is complicated. But it's probably related to, I took that water sample, the area just has poor quality water, the drainage isn't good. And so kind of no matter what it is, improving drainage is probably going to help both issues. So that was where I left that. And I wanted to use this example partly because I think that's going to be a really common thing, is that we won't be able to know exactly, but often if you narrow it down to some similar things, you can give some management advice that may be applicable kind of no matter what it ends up being. Um, so um, that was my case study, or that was my example. So I thought I might turn it over both to questions, or if you guys would like to turn it over to you guys. Um, um, Mike contributed some disease pictures, and if you would be interested in grilling him to try and get more at the issue, we could do that. Or if you just want to ask general questions, we could do that too. But so kind of up to you on what you want to happen next.
So let's open the group to questions. Does anyone have any questions for Pat? You can unmute or you can type them in chat. Either way.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens. And
Okay. So I guess my question for you, you're seeing these photos, right?
Mhm.
So say you're at the farmer's market and oh, we got some.
My
Uh,
plants look very healthy, but no fruit.
oh, that's a good question. Um, okay, lots of specific questions. Um, let's see. So I guess let's see what's a good approach to this. Mm, yeah, specific questions are tricky because there's a lot of them, and for each of these specific ones, what I would want to do is ask some of these um, questions. Okay, we've got
Yeah.
several
They're
about
they're
heat.
com they're coming in now.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. Um,
We can ask people to unmute if you want to have more of a conversation about their questions.
yes.
Okay. I
Oh, well,
I'll ask everyone to unmute.
so I'm looking at the questions, but I'm unsure how to approach it because we just have a very limited amount of time and they're on specific topics. Um, but there's several questions around heat.
Mhm.
So I guess in keeping with my presentation, what I would say is, if you have that question, how would you know what a reliable source to look to would be if you're needing to get an answer for yourself?
Whoa.
I guess that would be the question, is like my first thought would be, let's see what UCIPM has to say about it. Um, for example, heat, or the one question, Jeff's question, what causes the large white spots shown on the earlier photo? That would be a great question, like where there's a specific symptom, for looking at one of those resources. For example, that Seminus book that I gave a link to, or there's a lot of university websites that have a list of, these are the common fruit issues. And so that's where looking at some of these lists from sources and just matching the image can be really helpful. And yes, indeed, that earlier photo was sun-scald. Like that's a very common, very easy to identify thing. And just by looking at a lot of pictures, you can tell. And then also that's another one that you can kind of look at what the weather's been like, and you can tell. For questions about heat, that's a tricky one, and it's one, or the plants producing fruit early but then quitting. It's tricky because again, there's several suspects. So think first back to your list of potential suspects that I gave you. And there's some that are probably pretty easy to cross off, right? Like insects are usually pretty easy to tell if you have them or if you don't. Maybe not russet mites or something like that, but anyhow, can potentially cross them off. You don't get herbicide damage randomly every single year. You can probably cross that off. Heat may well be. Nutrient deficiencies, you could think about that. Do you see any symptoms that are associated with the plant not producing fruit early? Or with, do you see any like nutrient symptoms that symptoms on the plant which develop over time that are associated with the plants not producing fruit as much? The question about how do you know if your plants have fusarium wilt? That's a little bit trickier. Some telltale symptoms like Again, I would look at, there's the resources like UCIPM can give you these are common symptoms, and just looking at many from different places can help you get an idea of what you're looking at, like fusarium wilt. Fusarium, and one of the things that you often see is vascular discoloration that travels up the plant. So not like you want necessarily to get a knife and be carving up your plant, but really that's one of the only ways to tell. There's a question about nutrients, which this is a really good question. Is there a point in the life of a tomato plant when it's too late to correct a significant lack of nutrients in the soil? This is a really good question, and there was a resource that I referred to. Let's see, the California Fertilizer Guidelines. If you Google just California Fertilizer Guidelines tomato, for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, these will list when in the life of the tomato it's taking up that nutrient. And this can give you an idea of when the appropriate times are. And they'll also give advice about if you want to take a soil test, how to interpret it, when it's the appropriate time, when it's too late. So this is a really good resource, the California Fertilizer Guidelines. But yes, the short answer is when it depends on the nutrient. It depends on when the plant is taking up the nutrient and when it's just redistributing it. And a little bit on the variety. Let's see. 20 tomato plants are doing great, but one is losing leaves that turn black. Fruit looks okay, but the same location had problems in the past. Interesting. So with that one, I think I would want to ask some of those who questions. So is that one plant the same variety? What kinds of varieties? had that problem in the past? Is it the same soil? Like, um,
Am, am I unmuted?
Yes.
yes.
I'm Kathy Brown. I asked that question.
Ah, okay.
The soil, the soil is the same in 7 boxes
Mhm.
and all different kinds of plants. But this one location last year had a plant that didn't do well, same kind of wilting of leaves, no vascular damage. When I cut it off,
Mhm.
it looks good. The soil was treated exactly the same. I mean, it has a slight difference in sun, but not much. The tomatoes, it has 3 tomatoes on it. The leaves do die from the
Mhm.
bottom up, but
Okay.
it's got, it just has puzzled me. It did last year. The tomatoes that are on are small, and it's a Berkeley tie-dye. I have another Berkeley tie-dye. Of course, as usual, they're gigantic. And
Mhm.
so it just, I mean, to this year, I have 2. So the comparison, I'm able to look at, I treat them the same, I water them, all the conditions are so similar. I
Mhm.
don't know what's wrong with that spot.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it sounds like just my knee-jerk reaction would be something soil-borne.
Uh-huh.
And it's something in the soil, like as you say, if you're I like the way you think. You're thinking about like what is the management, what is all the same, what's different, and what
Yes.
seems to be different
Mm-hmm.
is the soil at that particular spot, which again
Yeah.
that makes me think it's something in the disease range. And so what I would do if this were a field that I was called in on would be I would take a lot of pictures, I would look exactly where that damage is on the leaves. Where does it start? Upper side, lower side? Do you see any like deformation? What does the colors look like? And then start looking at some of these sites like the UCIPM or the Seminus
Mm-hmm.
Guide,
Yeah.
the Google image
And I,
search.
I don't see it on UCIPM. I use that all the time, that diagnostic tool,
Yeah,
not just
yeah.
for tomatoes, but for everything. I think it's great. And I recommend it to people all the time when
Nice.
we're at our Master Gardener table. But it it just yeah, I'll get to the bottom of it, I suppose. But I really feel like that soil is my issue. I've always felt that, but it's a large box. Everything else does well there.
Oh, that's
And
interesting. Okay.
I hate to, I think I'm just not going to put a tomato there. I tried just one this year in that
Mhm.
location, just because I put beans on either side of it, just because it was annoying me that it wouldn't respond. But
Mhm.
I'll keep playing with it.
Yeah. And should also potentially not say this, but your local extension agent is also just very curious and passionate about tomato diseases. So I
Uh-huh.
did put my email at the end here. I am always excited to see. I'm always excited to see pictures of.
A tomato problem.
Yes, yes, tomato problems, not necessarily diseases, but yes,
Okay.
tomato
Okay.
problems are my hobby and my passion. So, um,
I'd love to do that.
yeah, and I should say there are some things that just end up being mysteries. And
Mm-hmm.
when things are mysteries, usually, as you were saying, a good idea is to figure out if you can, like, what type of mystery it might be. Again, like it's something with the soil. Okay, don't put tomatoes there for a while.
Yeah.
Um, Probably a good strategy. Another good strategy, just when it ends up being a mystery, is like a lot of times they get a question like, my plants aren't doing well. I think they have a disease. Should I fertilize them more? Should I water them more? The answer for
Mm-hmm.
that is almost always no. Unless so this is not related to your question, but just in general for things that you don't know off the top of your head, but they're asking you, should we manage differently? Like
Yeah.
the best advice that's almost always correct is manage how you normally would for a good tomato plant. Um, and yeah, especially like unless that particular nutrient is the problem, don't put more. Unless watering is the problem, don't put more.
Okay.
General
Okay.
good advice. But yeah, and the same if it's something with the soil, rotate out. Um, Even if you're not able to pinpoint exactly what it is.
Okay. And where did you, oh, there it is, uh your contact. I didn't see that right off.
Oh, yep. I just switched it. Let's see. Did I answer everyone's questions?
I think you got
Oh,
everyone except the white.
oh, so there's two complicated, actually no, three questions. The plants look very healthy, but no fruit. That's a really tricky one. There's several things that cause that. Like one, I mean the biggest, like yeah, there's a lot of things that cause to not set fruit or to drop fruit. And then there's things like too much nitrogen that just cause the plant to make a lot of leaves. Um, so there's just yeah, those kinds of like physiological things are trickier than specific diseases, but some things to think about again, like the environment. Is that true both on ones that have more sun and have more shade? Do you see any temperature changes or differences? Yeah, thinking about like how are they fertilized? Have you been using the same soil for a long time? All of those are, yeah, look at if there's patterns that you can look for. If it's uniform, that's a little bit harder. Um, Black bottom, I
Oh,
think,
thank you.
yeah. Um, Black bottom, I think is that the same as blossom end rot?
Hello, this is Judy Janes,
Yeah.
and I posted that question. I have a planter with about 8 tomato plants in it. Most of them have already formed fruit. They're green, they're starting to ripen. One plant has several tomatoes on it, but at the underneath the tomato that's forming, there's this black bottom that forms, and I've had that in previous years, but I trying to understand why this one plant has that this year.
Mm-hmm. And you and the rest of the world, blossom end rot is it's nasty. Um, it's technically caused by calcium deficiency, but it really has to do with how evenly the plant is taking up water. And so the question is really interesting, like why can it happen to one plant and not others? And that could be something like a root that was twisted in planting, or like sometimes we'll see when there's just some kind of constriction to the root growth that could just happen from one shock, when it was first planted even. Like there's a lot of things that can cause uneven moisture uptake. So it can be issues with the soil, it can be issues with the transplant quality. So unfortunately, that's one that's kind of perplexed the tomato world and is still perplexing the tomato world, is how do you avoid that? Think about,
Yeah.
yeah, 3/4 of the questions that I see are, yeah, blossom end rot, herbicide damage, and fusarium wilt. Um, but yeah, it's a, that one is, it's complex.
Okay, thank you.
Uh,
Oh, okay. I guess that's it. We're just about out of time. Pat, thank you so
Or,
much.
yeah, if hang on for a minute, folks,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. A couple things. One is I think that was a really useful approach to tools and kind of an approach that you could apply to a lot more than just tomatoes. So thank you, Patricia. That was really helpful. Two more things. One is next week, not next week, but in 2 weeks, Janie Santos, who, if you've heard her before, know she does a tremendous presentation. We'll talk about just basically common garden problems and their solutions. So we all have common garden problems, and we all want the solutions. So that would be a good one to catch on the 24th. The other thing is that the University Extension has asked us to solicit you to see if you'd be willing to fill out a survey that will just help to show how these types of programs, these programs in particular, are helping to change your gardening behavior and practices. So if you're willing to do that, it's entirely voluntary, and this is only for community members, not master gardeners. I think they're going to get you next. But for community members, most of you probably have Jennifer Baumbach's email address. I'm going to put it into chat. Did it go up? No? Why not? Yeah. There it is. Okay. If you are willing to fill out such a survey, and I think it takes in the 10 to 20-minute kind of range, just send Jennifer an email saying you're willing to do it. She will send the survey to you. It's all going to be done online, and you can send it back to her, or maybe there's another address. I'm not sure about the nuts and bolts, but it would be really helpful to get feedback on what we're doing here, or in general, other presentations that you may have seen. So, okay. That would be very helpful if you're willing to do that. And with that, again, thank you, Patricia, and happy gardening, folks. Hopefully it'll cool off here in a few days and we can all get out in our gardens again. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Joan.
Bye, everybody. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Too.